Hello, Internet, and thank you very much for tuning into the Cloud Native FM podcast YouTube channel. Hope you're listening to me correctly. If you notice anything glitches or anything in the voice, do let me know in the chat. And we are about to kickstart the journey that we definitely wanted to hear on this channel, a WSL report for year 2023. And with that, we actually have some action-packed guest lineup for today. So WSL is actually abbreviation for Windows Subsystem for Linux, and is a great way to easily get your hand on a Linux environment with a native Bash shell and interact with native Linux tool. So today we are actually take a look at the ultimate Windows Subsystem Linux tweaks and tips for setting up your WSL environment for DevOps, automation, Kubernetes learning, testing, and many more scenarios. So, without any further delay, let me go straight to my guest, Nuno and Hayden. Thank you very much for being on the show, both of you.
Hi.
So, first thing first, go to the Nuno first. Can you introduce yourself to our audience? And then I will switch to Hayden. Over to you, Nuno.
Yeah. Hi, Saim. Hi, everyone. Hi, Aiden, my friends. So I'm Nuno do Carmo. I work for a company that you might see everywhere here, SUSE. I'm a tech writer, and in the world of WSL, I'm known as the Corsair, and I've been using WSL since its beginnings in 2016. Aiden?
Hey, I'm
Thank
Hayden
you, Nuno,
Barnes.
for
Thank you,
being on the
Sam.
show. And let me go. Hayden, how are you? Can you introduce
I'm
yourself?
doing I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Sam. Hey, Nuno. Hey, community. So excited to be here. I am currently the open source community manager for HPE's AI software solutions. Those include open source projects like Determined, an ML training platform, Pachyderm, a data management platform. However, in terms of WSL, I've been active in WSL since 2016, 2017. I've known Nuno from the community for quite some time, and always fun to see what his latest hacks on WSL are. Within the WSL community, I've been somewhat of an organizer and touch point for the community, keeping track of the latest features, organizing a couple conferences along the way, maintaining WSL.community, which is our dedicated Telegram channel, and in general, lurking in the WSL GitHub issues, helping out when I can.
He's a way
Yes, thank
better
you very
introduction.
much. And Hayden been known for a very good long. Yes. So thank you very much, Nuno and Hayden, for both of your introduction. And I think both of them are very familiar figure in the internet around WSL. Either you can search their name, then WSL came up in front of you, or either you search WSL. Those two figures actually came in front of you. Either way, your search is actually appearing these two personalities right now that you're seeing on the screen, and they have done super great work for helping developers across the globe to be a more productive with the container technology. So let's first thing first, I can ask the first question that people will kickstart our journey. To kick things off, can you provide a brief overview of your experience and involvement with WSL distributions? So who want to take it? Nuno, Hayden first.
I'll go first. So I migrated to Windows and WSL from Mac OS. I found the ability to use various Linux distros, customize those Linux distros to be much more flexible than the Unix environment that Mac OS provided. I also enjoyed the variety of hardware that I could use WSL on laptops, my Windows Dev Kit 2023 powered by ARM, workstations, even Windows Server. In terms of my involvement with various distributions. Um, I'm known for having created Penguin, which is a bespoke Debian rebuild optimized for WSL. We also created the Fedora remix for WSL, and the company that started under also offers Penguin Enterprise, which offers RHEL and RHEL derivatives to enterprise customers customized for their environment. Later on, I went on to lead WSL advocacy and engineering at Canonical on Ubuntu for WSL. So then had some involvement with WSL on when I moved to Rancher with the SUSE distribution. So there was a brief time where I had some involvement in almost all of the WSL distributions available. Now there are many more WSL distributions available on the store and from GitHub, and you really have your broad choice of Linux environments, including the latest, you know, newest distros like Nix and other options.
Yeah, I'll go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you very much. It's been I think it's, yes, go ahead. No, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so for myself, I'm not as active in creations of distros like Aiden is. My involvement is more like bringing distros that already exist in the Linux world to WSL. Some are still challenging, and I'm reaching like not the limit, but I'm reaching like the very specific use cases like the uh, how do you say, like micro OS and Silverblue, the uh I don't remember the name now in English, sorry, but I'll get there. And the thing is like doing that made me learn a lot again about Linux, uh, because WSL is so stripped out that it uses, for example, for Ubuntu, for some time it used like the server edition. Tumbleweed is really limited to the very, let's say, smallest package that you can have, because you just need to download it and work on the command line. Of course, the community over the years, and maybe we'll talk that later, but over the years we were always asking like, okay, but we still need graphics from time to time. So people ask so much that Microsoft provided that. So myself, my involvement is more like go to a niche distro. Like I started WSL trying to implement Clear Linux from Intel. Even nowadays, no, it's not like a mainstream distro, you can tell. And this year, I will talk a bit more about that maybe later. But this year was all about Wolfie from ChainGuard, the on distro. So it's a distro that is not a distro at all. It's really meant for some other purpose, security and containers. Like that's the main target. But then the challenge was so, let's say, so yummy that I had to go there. So yeah, so over the years I've been writing, I've been doing some blogs, I've been working of course with Aiden when he was at Canonical. I was working for Aiden when it was when he was at Rancher, not for on WSL front, but for tech writing. And the thing is like we clicked that way because we were always like kind of in the same path, which is WSL if you want, like, but he had always like creating things and I was more like the testing and bringing some, let's say, cloud native IDs to the mix. So we really complementary.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a great way because we have some extensive experience from the both field have so have can good question to ask here. So can we draw our attention toward container and AI integration at this moment of point, because that's where a lot of things happening. So can you share, and I'm asking to Hayden, can you share specific use cases or success stories where the integration of WSL with container and AI has made a notable difference in development workflow during this year?
Absolutely. So,
Over to you, Hayden.
uh, yeah, absolutely. I currently work on an open source project called Determined. It is a machine learning infrastructure platform for ML engineers. And in terms of WSL, the official support for Windows comes through WSL, and it is deployed through containers using Docker Desktop and the NVIDIA Container Runtime. And you can easily stand up the entire platform using WSL, Docker, and then the latest features incorporating NVIDIA support, CUDA support in WSL. So that is now a part of our official docs. And several members of my team run determined on WSL using the container, the NVIDIA container runtime, and the CUDA pass-through through DirectX on Windows. So that is used in production. We use it for demos. It is possible to build and train machine learning models on your machine with WSL. And that's a trend I'm seeing across the board recently in WSL, not just with machine learning, but with tools in general, where they were previously Linux only, but their documentation are increasingly adding WSL sections and how to use this on WSL. So a lot of toolkits, a lot of programming languages, a lot of open source projects that used to be simply Linux are now more accessible and available to Windows users. And their WSL implementation, where a few years ago might have been experimental, are now part of the official documentation and delivery method for those containers and those solutions. So not just my project, but lots of other projects as well.
Yes, and we have Lucy in the chat. And thank you. Hello. Hi, Lucy. Thank you for joining us. And it say the WSL CUDA and direct ML pass through enable very useful GPU access for AI workloads. Uh, and and more. On Windows 11 with 3D work in WSLG, you can even get a visualizer running if you have a front end that needs to run on Linux. Great. So there are some wonderful things happening in the WSL plus AI in that front as well. So I will ask a question to Nuno, because some of the developers who might watching us and they wanted to need some customization, because customization is the key for developers. And Nuno, what are some unique feature or customization offered by specific WSL distribution that you find particularly useful for tailoring the development environment?
Yeah, so we had this discussion some time ago, but like WSL customization right now is quite really nice, because if you know a little bit about WSL, you can change a lot of things like kernel modules, for example, if you need in security. Like at the very beginning, like we have like a standard kernel which is open source, is on GitHub for WSL, and then for example Cilium and every like Falco also, but anything eBPF, then you needed to actually enable the modules, the BPF modules and other modules. So by allowing that, the kernel being open, you can just git clone the repo, change the change that you have to do, rebuild the kernel, and then you can start up your WSL with this new kernel with the exact modules that you want. I think first off, like especially in cloud native, where it's a mix between security and features about the kernel level. The kernel, like the WSL kernel, is quite generic. It has some features that is pro AI, of course, pro 3D, a little bit pro cloud native nowadays. But the fact that you can simply change it, and it's quite straightforward. So you do it as you would do back in the day. Nobody compiles no more Linux kernels on Linux side. So that's funny when I speak with my friends and I say, oh, I compiled my X kernel this month, and he was like, what for? And I'm like, yeah, but I need to compile kernels now. So we are the new kernel compilers. But the thing is, like, by doing that, you can have really a more powerful instance, and the kernel is residing on the Windows file system, meaning like we will maybe, if we have time, discuss that part. But like you can distribute that across your teams if you want in a company. Then the fact that since the very beginning, WSL could consume a container export rootfs, then it means that if you know containers, you can create your distro, put your tools inside, pull every workflow, whatever you need, export that container, and import it into WSL. And now you do have like a kind of template or standard for you, for your teams, and so on. And of course, by creating containers like this, it means that you can put on some CI and ensure that your base image is the one that you want and need at any time. So it's very few like customizations, but I think are maybe one of the most important. And of course, since then we have also like WSLG, which is the graphics. So we have some customization there also. But yeah, right now I think it's like kernel plus the image, how you create your image. I think it's something that it's really powerful for any developer.
Yes, absolutely. And at the next question, I will be handing over to Hayden, and same for the no-nos as well, is because that's where I need to see some of the different opinions. Like we know there's a lot of Linux distributions out there. Then you have a lot of flexibility to choose, and WSL has some. As in the store, you can see. I think there are so many distribution out there. So, Hayden, what factor do you consider when choosing a particular distribution for your development environment, and how these choices impact your workflow?
Yeah. So my first bit of advice would be to pick the distro you're most comfortable with and familiar with. If you are uh, more familiar with Ubuntu, uh, go with Ubuntu. WSL is a great way to experiment with different distributions. But in terms of your first steps in the WSL journey, go with the distro you're most familiar with. If that is a SUSE-based distro, something like OpenSUSE Tumbleweed uh, is a great choice. If you're familiar with a RHEL-based environment, you have options like Penguin Enterprise or Oracle Linux. There's even Arch distributions if you come from Arch. So my first bit of advice is in your first steps on WSL, go with something that you're familiar with, because you're already going to be learning how to set WSL up, learning about the Windows Linux integrations, and being comfortable with installing packages and customizing your environment is key. However, another factor to consider is what you're trying to accomplish and support from third-party tools. So, I mean, while distributions like Arch are very cutting edge and very cool to run, if you're going to be running a stack of third-party software that mostly includes support for OpenSUSE or Ubuntu, you're going to want to go with a distro that is officially supported because you're less likely to run into surprises that you're going to have to, figure your way around. A third factor is the age of packages. If you really want, bleeding edge, an Ubuntu LTS is not going to have, it's going to have security patches, but it's not going to have necessarily the latest Python, the latest Node. You're going to want to look at something like Tumbleweed or Fedora Remix. Those are going to have the latest packages. So go with something you're comfortable with. Go with something that supports the workflow you want to accomplish, that are included in the documentation of the projects you're working with. But also consider the versioning and age of the packages. You may find Debian just to be a little bit too outdated. If you want the latest toolkits, even things like .NET packaged upstream that you want to develop in, for cross-platform applications, you're going to find the latest versions and more bleeding edge distributions. So those are things I would all consider. Also, finally, the community around those distributions. You're going to find official distributions from Ubuntu, from OpenSUSE, from community efforts that are backed by Penguin, like Penguin and Fedora Remix, to be much more supported. And you're going to find a much more responsive community if you run into issues than potentially unofficial third-party rebuilds. Because if you're downloading an unofficial third-party build of a distro that does not officially support WSL, and you go to that community, they may say, well, this is unofficial, this isn't supported. You're going to want to look at the community around each distro as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. These are the points you have to take into the consideration as well. And also in the chat, we has Ron Chaplin. I hope you pronounce your name correctly. So he mentions, as a professional lead developer, I have used WSL for a while to stand up a LEM stack. The biggest hurdle in the past has been to ensure PHP strong integration. So I can tune this question a bit like, let's say, is it a possible you can actually add some point of library packages, like pre-built packages for the .NET or Java or PHP in a WSL distribution and start developing application on top of it?
Absolutely. However, it's worth noting that JetBrains products like PHP Storm, Client, and their other IDEs are increasingly seeing WSL integration. It varies between the IDEs, the level of integration. However, I think the goal is to be fully integrated across all of their products eventually. But not just JetBrains, but also VS Code, Visual Studio, a variety of other development tools are integrating with WSL. And I know JetBrains has been very responsive to feedback for that integration and integrating that into all of their various products. So if integration with PHP Storm isn't quite where it needs to be, I would definitely continue pressing JetBrains because their integration with some other products is top notch.
Okay, good. Absolutely. And I go to the Nuno again, and Nuno, what is the most WSL distribution have you actually played most with? And then what's your key takeaway on choosing the WSL distribution? And plus, like a distribution that have some pre-built packages for the developer to start working their applications.
So I won't repeat everything that Aiden said because it was dead on. Like, use the distribution that you need first. Like, what is your purpose? If you want to do some learning, like I did, let's say, go for Ubuntu. I'm an OpenSUSE, okay, guy. I love Tumbleweed. There's a lot of docs, but the community of Ubuntu since the years, I think it's just, for now, it's still kind of unmatched, at least for the entry point, and even going later on. But then you have like OpenSUSE community, which is really welcoming, really friendly. You can ask a lot of questions there. Also, they will be eager to help. Arch communities. I won't enter into like what Arch communities are, but Arch communities are still there, are huge. So you will get information there without having to search too much. And Arch docs are one of the best. Like literally, they explain a lot of things there. They go really deep. So if you are learning, then in my case, of course, cloud native. Going forward, the let's say the OS of choice right now as a developer, I would say, and that's not me being me, but it's like Tumbleweed. You will be amazed about all the packages like kubectl, Elm, Docker, Podman that are already on the repositories, and you don't have to do anything. You just run the zipper command for installing your package, and it's there. So, like Aiden explained before, try to understand what is the purpose. When I started with Clear Linux, like I said. Why? Because it was just different. Like the package management is different. It comes in bundles instead of pure package. So you have to understand that all the passes are kind of retweaked. So you don't really. It's really difficult to break the system actually for Clear Linux. And this year I took the other approach where I had nothing. I had to almost build everything myself, which is Wolfie OS by ChainGuard, and think like an Alpine, even smaller. And the repositories, I went there. It was like maybe 270, I think, packages to now more than 10K or 20K. So they really grew up like massively. But again, it's not meant for. But for me, it was perfect because I had to learn a lot. I had at some point tried to understand compilation with Meson. I'm not a C guy or C++ guy at all, but for the needs of one package, I had to rebuild some parts, and then, well, rabbit hole. It went through a lot of things. So if you want like a normal distro, uh, all in Ubuntu, OpenSUSE, Arch, and others maybe. If you want niches, distros, NixOS, for example, someone in the community created NixOS for WSL. Like there's a repo on GitHub, and that's perfect. I don't know Nix. The pass and the, let's say, the how it behaves is quite different from the others also in terms of file system. So if you don't know the system, it's hard to implement it. But again, the community was there and did that. And just one last word about all that. If you see, like I work with a lot of different companies behind the distros also sometimes and communities. The funny part from me is like every time that I tweeted about it. So first of all, I'm not as known as Aiden, so I don't get as much hate as he does all these years. So I'm good. I'm good. He has some entries in some Linux weird communities where his name is popped off, but for me, I was always under the radar thanks to him. But the thing is, like one thing that everyone needs to understand: let's say the companies or the communities that are like the builders of these distros. Every time that I blogged or I tweeted about it, they were 100% behind. Like they were like, "Oh, so nice! How did you do? Can you write a blog? Can you help here? Can you tell us how?" So they were always like very supportive. Meanwhile, in the other end, where you have the user community, that don't build at least the distro but use them, like, right, then you have more mitigated reactions. So for me, it was really funny to have like the creators that know that it just give them another reach for their distro, and then the user land that still sees, like, I don't want to enter into the drama too much, but it's like they still see like, okay, it's Microsoft, so it's bad. But like your distro is as yet another now display. New people can discover it and potentially swap to it at some point in time. So choose your distro not carefully, just choose your distro for what you need and test it. Like creating a distro and removing a distro is as easy, one or the other. So you can just try it out and say, I don't like this one, and remove it.
Yes, absolutely. These are absolutely a solid point in here. And also in the chat, it's some love for Ubuntu is definitely unmatched in terms of mind share from Lucy. And then there is a question from Ranch Chaplin again. The tooling integration hurdle is that I run PHP natively in Windows. So I am able to access the file, share files for editing, but tooling like Bash integration within PSTM is difficult or not possible. So Nuno, Hayden, what's your takeaway on this?
Yeah, I'll just start quickly. Sorry, Aiden, just to, but I won't explain that part. There's a very good point that Aiden before speak about, and Ron is asking. WSL is a back end endpoint. Okay, so it's running stuff there, and the difficulty, or let's say the challenges nowadays, is to get the Windows client, okay, to connect to the server. Okay, we are not speaking about like,
Yes.
because potentially you can run PHP Storm from within a distro inside WSL, but the integrations between Windows applications and WSL backend workflows, that's the thing that is challenging for now. Okay, Aiden, sorry.
Nope. I would say definitely reach out to JetBrains if you're having specific issues with one of their IDEs, because they've been very responsive and have been uh, one of the largest developer tool vendors that have embraced WSL. And like I said, some of their products don't have quite the integration level yet. They're at different stages. But I think their goal is full integration down the line. So that's very constructive feedback for JetBrains.
Okay, Saim, you there?
Yes. Can you hear me, guys?
Yep.
Yes. So now we can actually circle back. Uh, so there now we can actually circle back communication towards WSL September update. And I see some noticing some very good updates on the WSL side as well. And we're getting your opinion on that. Is like now in WSL 2023 upgrade actually include auto memory reclaim. So that makes the WSL VM shrink in memory as you use it by reclaiming cache memory. So, have any of you actually found some issues in the past where memory limits reaches or not enough memory inside the Linux distribution, WSL distribution that you can run workload on? So, what this actually feature mean for some of the developers we have?
Well, I think the WSL team at Microsoft, Ben and Craig and the rest of the team are very responsive to developer feedback, user feedback, and concerns they see raised in the community. One of those concerns since WSL2 has come around is memory usage. And depending on what you're doing in your WSL space, you go into Task Manager, you see that VM memory space get bigger and bigger and bigger. And with WSL2 v2, we've seen a number of enhancements that address concerns around memory, performance, disk space, networking, drive, and device support, all of which were community requests from WSL users, and we see how responsive the WSL development team at Microsoft is to those. It's not always instant, but they do build careful, thoughtful solutions to the problems users are seeing. And they iterate very quickly too. So some of these have been in preview for some time, and then they officially landed in WSL2. But yeah, I mean, I definitely have seen developers and users raise the issue of memory usage, and having auto memory reclaim, having auto disk space reclaim, as well as the networking enhancements, are all pain points some developers have hit that have been addressed in WSL2 v2, and is very exciting to see. Not only to have the features, but to see how responsive the WSL team at Microsoft continues to be in addressing pain points and how responsive they are.
Yes, absolutely. And here's a link for people to go through some of the updates for WSL September 2023 update. You can actually take a look at it. And there's some reference blog in here. And Craig is a very good demo-oriented guy who did wonderful demos on all of these recent updates. I definitely want to take a look at you because some are very wonderful improvement. And in a passage of time, like I have been struggling around with these issues on the memory leaky because sometimes WSL, when you start running
Okay. I think we might have lost him again.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
think we can keep it going.
yeah, no problem. So one thing that you were saying, and that is totally maybe unseen, and I went through the repo actually of the WSL releases. So this year alone for 2023, we had 30 public releases. 3 of them were releases, like something that you just do the WSL dash dash update command, and you will get the new version. And then we add 27 pre-releases. So it means like for us, especially Aiden, Lucy also in the chat, of course, and myself, we do have maybe another instance where we have WSL pre-release. And this pre-release was actually 27 out of them. So it means that if you want to see what Aiden was saying, like if you want to see these features being worked on and evolving, then follow like the pre-release channel. And at some point in time, what they made good, I really think, is that pre-release and release merge into one, and then you start again pre-releasing. So at any moment, let's say the moment that you have a release, if you don't want pre-releases anymore, then you can just stay on this latest release, let's say. 30 releases is quite a lot. And even though we had almost like a break about few months between the latest 1.2.5, I made some notes. I don't know them by heart. Like I'm not that nerd. And then, which was in April, and then it jumped. The next release, like the full release, was in November this month. Actually, that's what you were talking about, Saim, which come with always with a blog post. And so these 6 months, let's say, they were really used for one thing, and it was like to bring this V2, this WSL2 V2, which all these memory reclaim, disk space. Actually, was also some kind of concern, and not a concern like it was growing big. It was more like VHDX compression or parsing. It's something that is already new by the administrators of Hyper-V farms. Okay, so it's something that it's actually being done not in regular basis like daily, but in regular basis maybe monthly or something like that. So the technology was there. They just needed to implement it. So that's what they did now with the V2, which is great. And I think of course, the biggest one was really all these mirrored modes for networking. So networking and cross file system performances is something that since the very beginning of WSL2, 2019-ish, that came all the time. So the networking now, it's way better with more options. It's better in terms of features. It's maybe not better in terms of performances, but at least in features, we have more features. We have more modes, just not the NAT mode so far. So as we lost him again, let me ask you then, if I just take the notes, tack. Okay, let's enter, because 10 minutes. Let's enter now another realm for 2024 coming in, and is the enterprise market. So
Right.
in the news that we had, what are you, maybe one of them, but what are you the most excited about these enterprise features?
I mean, it's tough to pick just one. I mean, we've known for a long time that uh, WSL deployment in the enterprise is a challenge. Enterprise has very specific requirements for deployment of software, and they need security restrictions and monitoring and the ability to centrally manage the tooling that is on employee endpoints. So the integration of things like Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, the integration with Intune, and advanced enterprise networking, kind of building on some of the networking features that we previously mentioned, things like DNS tunneling, the ability to apply firewall restrictions, the ability to leverage a proxy. I know, for example, my employer uses a proxy to access internal resources, and the ability for WSL to inherit those proxy settings directly from Windows and leverage those have been a big breakthrough. I think this is a huge step towards overcoming some of the objections that enterprise IT administrators and security administrators have towards deploying WSL in the enterprise, which is otherwise just an open sandbox where anyone can install anything. At least now, we can have WSL in the enterprise compliant with the individual company's security policies, deploy and manage WSL on those endpoints, secure them, and it just means that, in my experience, a lot of developers have their Windows issued laptop, and then they bring their Linux computer to get a lot of work done. And now they'll be able to actually get that work done on the machine issued to them, and stay compliant with corporate policies. So I think it's a big deal. One interesting aspect, going back to your question, the most interesting aspect is one of the features that was required to implement Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is a new feature called WSL plugins, which basically allows Windows applications to call WSL backends and then have certain events triggered by certain WSL events. It's cool because it's just more Windows Linux integration. But I think just that feature alone, even though it was created for Defender for endpoint, it's going to unlock a whole host of new use cases for WSL as a backend tool for front-end utilities. We already have Docker Desktop, Podman, Rancher Desktop. We have integrations, between editors and IDEs. But the ability to leverage WSL as a backend, I think, is about to get much cooler.
Oh yeah, totally. And that was one of the tweets that I put. Like, okay, WSL plugins. Does it mean that it's the end of these named pipes to sockets into the WSL distro and so on? So the integration from client to server and then back to run, then maybe PHP Storm also might become really, let's say, easier and more performant also, because it's less layers in between. Now it's like client to server almost directly, which is neat. So yeah, the enterprise was a funny story, because for us, SUSE, especially Rancher Desktop in that case, and I guess others might be the same, is that some customers wanted to leverage a container desktop, okay, like Rancher Desktop or Docker Desktop, Podman Desktop. But then the concerns were not around the tool, was around how they could not manage WSL2 in terms of security, in terms of corporate policies, like Aiden said, and distribution of the like locking WSL, in the sense that only your image is running on top of it and you cannot install anything from store and stuff like that. So you had some ways to actually do that already, but not to the extreme that's now starting 2024, right, will be. So I'm really, really looking forward how, let's say, normal companies, like non-IT, non-tech companies, will leverage WSL and the tooling built around it. Because again, I like how we discussed, right? WSL is a backend, should be like a feature that should be invisible for most of us, like most of the developers, most of the administrators, even potentially. You have your tool that is connecting to a Windows feature called WSL, but you don't really manage that. It's like, think Hyper-V server, and you just have your GUI, and then you go through it, and that's it. So I think it's it's something that I'm really looking for, like this layer of abstraction, and again, layer of manageability in companies at the end of the day, because it's definitely one huge part of WSL that is always like almost a fight to get WSL approved, WSL installed inside companies. Because what is really WSL? So you have like a VM that is non-manageable, like a VM. The networking is you don't know, it's a VM switch, so you cannot really like manage it the way you want or the way you do with others. So really, really looking forward to those, definitely.
Yeah, up until now, uh, in terms of there's been those limitations in management, and one of the few options available, for example, has been working with Penguin Enterprise and having an expert in WSL like Carlos over at Whitewater Foundry build bespoke lockdown images for those environments. So now we can take those images, built either with an outside consultant like Carlos or internally, and link them to these new enterprise features and empower developers in the enterprise environment.
Yes, absolutely. And just before we wrap up the conversation here, Nuno and Hidden, so what is the development workflow? Is in how you see the development workflow is in the WSL. If somebody developing application on top of WSL, what are the newest things they actually take into the consideration, and shed you some light into the development workflow that you'll be recently noticing, and you see some extensions point within the developer workflow and the AI integration.
So I'm not a developer myself, right? So I just see other developments going through. One thing that has been there since almost ever, and I guess was maybe lost in the way, I don't know, but since the very beginning of WSL2, they shared how Blizzard, for example, was coding Diablo or parts of Diablo 4 on Windows through WSL2. So these integrations, these let's say you want to build for Linux, but like Aiden said just before, your company has a Windows only laptop policy, for example, or computers, then what's the best option out there? Is creating a full VM, or is going through WSL where you can have more integrations and potentially some performances that are not better, but at least at the same level as a VM, without the, let's say, the need to create a VM, the need to separate like network, CPUs, and so on. So it's just integrated like that. So for workflows, one thing that I saw this year, and again in the container workspace and Kubernetes workspace, I truly think that you will have more and more client sides connecting to WSL UIs. Like think Minikube is already doing that. Then why not K3S potentially, like front end on Windows and then back end on the. I'm not saying that we are bidding it, by no means. I'm just stating like it could be micro OS. Micro Minikube and MicroK8, sorry, MicroK8 from Ubuntu, like they could have no more the need for creating a VM, but instead going for a backend on WSL directly because they can. So, I mean, that's I see the workflows like Ron was asking for this PHP Storm is one of out of many. Maybe you have some Rust, maybe you have some still Go, some other that are not JetBrains, that are not Microsoft. Maybe other editors will come into play. Who knows?
Yeah, on the flip side,
Yes.
thanks to the new integration of WSLG, uh, we're also seeing developers who are using just Linux native IDEs and just doing everything within the WSL environment. So I think the key aspect of WSL is choice. You're running, you have the choice of Windows, you have the choice of Linux. You can leverage, you can use Visual Studio to build for Linux. You can integrate directly into Linux and build there. You can build your Windows binaries in Linux and then just run them from WSL. It's the flexibility and the choice that I think is the key advantage of WSL. And integration or all native. It's up to you. Build for Linux on Windows and then test it in WSL. Build your .NET app in Linux, connected through VS Code. Test it in Linux, build it in Linux, and then do a Windows build on the Linux side, and then run it on the Windows side. So it's choice, it's flexibility, it's the ability to customize those for your needs and your preferences. Because let's just be honest, a lot of developers, they tend to lean one way or the other. They tend to be very familiar with Linux or more familiar with Windows. No one knows everything. very few people are the unicorns that are experts in both Windows and Linux development. But WSL lets those developers customize it based on their familiarity and their growth pattern as developers as they get more comfortable on both systems.
Yes,
Did we
no.
lo-
Saim, are you
Well,
there?
I think we might be wrapping up soon. I'm not sure how much. Hey, Sam.
Oh, sorry. I'm just flickering. Sorry. So I'm just saying, like, as you mentioned, and Hayden and Nuno, as you mentioned, I love the WSL integration inside the VS Code. That is my lovely feature. So basically, you can run some command. You can actually basically run VS Code in Linux and the front end of the VS Code in Windows. Your terminal of the VS Code running in the Linux, and your front end, the desktop, is actually working on the Windows. That's its wonderful feature for debugging purposes. You can add a blocker in your code pipeline and then type command inside the Linux terminal to see what actually happening behind the scene as well. That's the most lovely feature I actually found in the VS Code as well. And as you mentioning, some other feature are really cool trick. And I think I asking all the time, people say again and again, like, gone are the days where you're actually creating two separate VMs and start developing application on Windows and learn Linux on top of it. Now there's a time you can actually develop application on Windows, on Linux, but don't need to figure out how the Linux install, how to package Linux, how to install Linux, how to run Linux. It's just a Windows machine. I think it's a heaven for the developer. Like, I'm really missing when I started developing my time in way back. I don't have, so I have to spin up my small laptop have to be in a two different portion. One is for the VM that running the Windows application. One is for the Linux application. And sometimes I'm figuring out how to actually manage it because sometimes you run out of the memory and other things. And great thing about WSL, you can tear it down instantly. Start developing, tear it down. I think that's the most exciting feature that developers are loving about because previously we have to spin up a Linux machine just to create your FYP project, and then you're figuring out how to actually relocate and how I get my memory back. So that are actually the extremely use cases. But now we are actually run out of the time. Both the final question from my side is what are the most where you have been spending most time in 2024 and what you have still seeing is missing in WSL that needed to be improved or needed to be actually enhanced uh, before going into the 2024.
Yeah, for me, it's
Hayden.
really file system. It's all about the file system. So I found my word. It was immutable systems, immutable distros like MicroOS, Silverblue, and others. The thing is to do that, the file system, the base file system of the rootfs needs to be something else than X4 right now, which is like a mandatory setting. So I've already worked a way around it, but it's too hacky to have. So for me, it will be this file system from the distro perspective. There's also the cross file system, which I touched base quickly between Windows and Linux performances, but it's being worked out. But hopefully, we'll see something on 2024. Yep, Aiden.
I am impressed by the significant improvements we're seeing in GPU pass-through, support for data in the WSL environment, things for support for DirectML, and now OpenGL and OpenCL, which actually required upstream enhancements in Mesa, which is an example of Microsoft contributing upstream to open source to enable the WSL experience. But expanded support for Intel and AMD GPUs, which we are coming to see more and more of. Also, Qualcomm uh, uh, processors, which on ARM, which increasingly have dedicated GPU components. And also, as Microsoft talks more and more about the integration of NPUs, which are a new chip on your board to perform essentially AI inferencing, but to optimize AI specific workflows without necessarily engaging a power hungry GPU, but an optimized circuit for inferencing and ML learning. Ability to access that over time as that becomes a standard feature in PCs is going to be very interesting for the AI ML engineer doing work in WSL.
Yes, absolutely. These are really interesting use cases to hear about. Absolutely. Even though listening to us in the AI world, definitely take a look at it. And basically, before I let you go, some people might be thinking, where do I find these people when we actually connect off from this stream? So I can share some resources and Haddon and both Nuno is one of those places they actually spend a lot of time in actually spending a lot of time in the this is one of the resources Nuno is actually take caring for. Then there's a resources called boxcables.dev and WSL community, and both of their Twitter handle Unix terminal and Unix stack is easier to understand and easier to type and not to forget about when you're actually spending a lot of the time internally. So make sure you haven't checked it out as well. And these are the two go to your resources for a year to come if you are actually hacking your life in WSL terminal and wanted to learn more about it. And even these are the most wonderful, easily approachable guys. So actually ping them on CNCF Slack or any or Ranchas Slack or even in the emails or even on the Twitter DMs. These are the more easy guys to actually hang up and start talking about their stuff they actually passionate and loving about most. So thank you very much, both of you. Really enjoy learning from you. Always see wherever you go, we are filled up with chats, filled up with insightful conversation on the chat as well. So Lucy is with us throughout the chat. Really enjoy conversation with you. Really heard a lot. And he also saying there is a WSL Telegram channel. You have to take a look at it. He said, doing so. We definitely add that all the links in there, Lucy. Definitely, I add all the links in the YouTube description so people can actually follow along as well. So basically, it's as easy. Type WSL. You can actually see those familiar faces, or you can actually type those names, Hayden or Nuno. You will see WSL in front of you. Either way, these guys you can't hide up if you are into the world of WSL, and if you're playing with desktops like Portman, Rancher, or Docker, you have to be understand the WSL some pieces in there. And AI is actually changing the way the game of the WSL, and there are some wonderful things Hayden spoke about. So you definitely had write some blog about it. I also have some personal blog. I will share the link in there. But thank you very much, both of you. I won't take much of your time. It's been a blast talking and learning about WSL with you. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye bye. And we will meet again and head in for next year.
Thank you all. Thank you,
Thank you.
Sam.
Thank you, both of you.